years since I drew because I feel like I was able to create an illustration where if I, of 13 years ago, saw this, would be like, wow, that's cool. That was the idea I had. Hello, I'm Nagu, an illustrator that usually works on light novel illustrations, character design, and PR illustrations for different mobile games. And yeah, in this video, to help build excitement for the Draw It Again illustration contest currently being held on pixiv, I'll look back on the process of creating the key visual I made for this contest and talk about my own approach to drawing redraw illustrations. Now, let's get started right away!
When you first started working on this redraw, which parts of the original illustration did you feel could be improved?
Well, when I looked at the original illustration again, I saw that the composition was guiding the viewer's gaze from the top to the bottom using the position of the planets behind. Like the smaller planets are at the top and the size gets bigger towards the bottom near the character. But I felt like the guiding line created with the headphones wires felt a little weak. And like the gaze of the viewers didn't quite go all the way around the illustration as I wanted to. So I wanted to improve the composition a little bit. And I thought I could also add probably a little more to the top near the white space to help guide the viewers' gaze or across the entire illustration and to the points where I find was important in the piece.
In your redraw, what kind of updates did you focus on in terms of composition and presentation?
Yeah, so to start off, I changed the lighting overall so that it would amplify the sense of wonder and discovery by making the globe glow actually and be a source of light. And also, with the headphone wires, I changed it so it would guide the viewer's gaze around the entire illustration, but also always come back to the main point or the main focus of the illustration, which is the girl holding the globe. So yeah, no matter where you start looking at the illustration, you will always be guided towards the main character. Yeah, and if you actually kind of roughly see it, the shape of the wire, I try to make it kind of like an hourglass shape to kind of represent time. Then it's kind of like redrawing the illustration from my past. So I wanted to incorporate also like the sense of time into the composition as well. And I also rearranged the planets to be a little different to follow the guiding line of the headphones. But I also organized them into two different size groups. So the three big planets were kept kind of the same as the original illustration. I also included the smaller planets as well to kind of create like a size contrast as well. And in the background, I also added some rubble, like space rubble and textures to kind of add to the theme of like space and also increase the complexity of the illustration. And the different lines in the back kind of like represent like gravitational fields and stuff, and the lines in the middle that actually go through the character, I wanted to use like magnetic field diagram kind of that gravitates you towards the character kind of. So yeah.
You've talked about adding light and other things, but what was the motivation for changing the direction of the globe specifically?
Yeah, so originally when I drew the piece in 2013, I, really wanted Japan to be in the center of the globe, so that's how the globe was positioned. But with the redraw, I kind of also wanted to make reference to like my origins. Like I grew up in North America while loving Japanese culture and art. So while the girl represents the Japanese culture and art, I also wanted to add a little bit of myself into the globe as well. So that's why I changed it to showcase the Americas. And actually, if you look closely at the globe where the on letters are, I also added the volume meter, which is like 79%. It's like 79 kind of stands for my name Nagu. And then it also has 2013 to 2016, which is the 2 different years that I drew the illustrations together. And yeah, that's why I changed the globe a little bit.
So when you first received this offer, what were your first thoughts? Is there anything you especially remember or anything you imagined or thought at the time?
Honestly, I was really happy and honored to receive the offer because it's just basically what I said, like recalling what I've been through and like remembering my origins. And after I accepted the offer, I was going through my illustrations, and it kind of made me recall what it was like drawing this piece all those years ago, and how excited I was to share illustrations online on Pixiv and other SNS. And I never would have imagined that I would be drawing for a living now, because I thought I was just gonna, get a normal office job and keep drawing as a hobby. But I felt really nostalgic. And it also made me feel really grateful about how I'm able to do something that I enjoy so much and share like my vision with the world. And yeah, that's why I want to pour a lot of my feelings into creating this piece again.
Out of all of your works, why did you choose this piece?
So the title of the piece is Planetes, which is actually the name of the song that I was listening to. It's a song, Planetes by Egoist. And while I really liked the piece itself, but when I went to re-listen to the song while redrawing, and I actually looked at the lyrics of the song at the same time, I was like, hey, this really fits the theme of redraw and waiting a long time to come back to where you originated from very well. So I was like, hey, this has to be the piece that I redraw. So it's really good. Yeah.
How do you think the light, shadow, and contrast contribute to the story or emotional expression of this piece?
So I think there is like a complicated relationship between like values, contrast, color, and how all those combinations relate to human emotions. Because there are times where you would look at a picture and be like, oh my goodness, I feel so fluffy, I feel so happy and warm. Whereas sometimes you will look at another picture and be like, oh my goodness, I feel so cold and lonely, and and these combinations of things I think is pretty important in storytelling in general. And I think for me with this piece, I want to definitely showcase like a sense of wonder, like discovery, and maybe just like revisiting, old memories and stuff. So yeah, I think it's like very intricately woven, I think, relationship between everything. Yeah.
When adjusting the color balance, at what stage do you check the overall sense of storytelling?
So for me, I like to do a pretty detailed color sketch before I move on to the stage, because it really helps me keep the direction of like where I want to take the illustration along the entire process, and it kind of serves as a reference point that I can come back to and be like, hey, what was I thinking to create, and is this what I want to create? So during the process, when I am kind of doubting myself, but like, hey, does this look okay? This is what I was going for. I would go back to the color rough that I already created and be like, hey, actually, this wasn't, what I wanted to do. This is, this is the same. This is not the same. So it's a good reference point. But at the same time, the color rough stage isn't like a this or bust kind of stage where it's like I do change things quite a bit in the end. So, but yeah, I think definitely constructing the entire thing at the beginning really helps for me. So that's when I think a lot about what kind of emotions I want to express and what kind of colors I'll be using, at least roughly.
So in this particular work, with all you know about different color values and how they can affect mood, what kind of emotions did you want to express through color and light?
So for this illustration, if you compare it to the original illustration, I definitely toned down the saturation around the character and focused the saturation on the character and the globe to create that saturation contrast, which kind of is something I want to create in the effects of like when things are really saturated and light, they give off that happy, what should I say, joyful vibe, which is something that I wanted to express, as in the girl holding the globe is experiencing these happy, joyful emotions of discovering stuff while holding the globe, but the outside is not as important, so it's a little less saturated. So that's kind of the emotions that you'll be feeling when you will be kind of feeling neutral about something and you discover something that you really like, and then all of a sudden the world feels a lot more colorful. So that was kind of the feeling of wonder and discovery that I wanted to include with this illustration. And yeah, I think in terms of what I was thinking otherwise, I mean, I watch a lot of movies and stuff with space, and I know space, it's a vacuum, there's no light, so it's very dark, it's very hard to see, but I didn't want this illustration to be dark, so overall it's pretty light. Even the background itself has elements with a little bit of darkness.
How do you think looking at the overall silhouette before focusing too much on the details affects the piece as a whole?
Well, to me, I think people in general recognize distinct big shapes and silhouettes before they can go in and see all the details. So having a very recognizable silhouette to draw attention to whatever you want people to pay attention to before paying attention to the details, I think is quite important, especially with these days, with a lot of people browsing through SNS, people scroll through posts really, really fast. But if there's that really recognizable, distinct silhouette that kind of makes them stop and look, I think that is probably what makes it pretty effective in terms of drawing attention.
What kind of atmosphere or depth do the textures add to this work?
Well, with the textures, I try to use textures that you would often see in like sci-fi kind of situations to create that harmonizing space theme that the girl is kind of standing in, including, of course, the gravitational fields, magnetic field, little lines, and while also adding in a little more complexity and detail to the artwork, because I really like adding these like noise or patterned or paper textures to just normal illustrations, because it kind of creates that semi-traditional feel almost, and creates a nice feel to, like, even a normal gradient seems a lot more natural and less synthetic. So that's the kind of feel that I really like putting in my illustrations.
So when adding texture, is there anything you keep in mind so that the image doesn't become too heavy or too much?
So I think this also goes back to me going back to the original idea of what I want to convey with the illustration. Because, for example, something for like a sci-fi or space elements, I don't want to be too grainy or too traditional-like, because it has the more, mechanical feel as well. But the elements that I add as an extra can't be too overbearing or take attention away from the important parts of the illustrations. So it's like a trial and error process where I would add something and be like, does this look good or is it too distracting? And you kind of try different things until it works. And so with this one, I added a lot of those sci-fi like textures without drawing too much attention from the main subject. But for example, if my intent was to make like an aged photograph illustration or an illustration that looked like an aged photograph, I would focus more on like adding like noise and chromatic aberration and different textures and elements and textures that would fit the objective. So yeah, I think it's like a case-by-case trial and error process.
When in the final stages of creating a piece, At what point do you feel like the illustration is finally coming together?
I think once I feel like I finished like rendering all the parts of the illustration and start on the post-processing, like color and level balancing, I can kind of see where everything is coming together. And it's basically the final step where I look at the overall process and be like, okay, what can I adjust to further strengthen my intent and idea? And is it too much? Is it too little? And it's kind of like a step-by-step, try this, try that, until I kind of find the point where I'm just like, okay, I think this is good. And yeah, that's where it is.
Between blur, noise, and color adjustment, which process do you feel best brings out your unique style or the style you're aiming for?
I think it'll probably be the color adjustment part, because like with my knowledge of, cinematography or photography, I sometimes, with my illustration, I sometimes want it to look like more like a photograph than an illustration, for example. So that requires, certain level balancing and color balancing while making it look digital at the same time, which is a weird balance, but I try to make it work. And I also do like adding textures to further enhance it, because even in the rendering process, I really like rendering different materials so that it's obvious that the materials are certain, for cloth or metal. So enhancing that with the final adjustments at the end, I think those two are probably the two things that is more noticeable with what I do. Yeah.
When you feel like, I think I can still improve this more, how do you decide what the cutoff line is?
So usually when I finish an illustration, well, at least when I'm relatively happy with it, I leave it for at least a couple hours or like a day or so, and I kind of come back to see it, to see if there's anything that really stands out that I want to fix. And I also like to look at the finished image from multiple devices, because the colors and stuff are different for all devices. So if there's one, major thing that stands out on a certain device, I'll be like, hey, how can I make changes so that it doesn't look as different on all the devices that I have? And so once I find kind of like a sweet spot where it's just like, I can't see anything big that I want to change, and I think it's okay to just release it into the world and call it done. Because my motto is kind of like, done is better than perfect. So I kind of just feel like, hey, I need to put this down so I can go work on other stuff.
How do you balance the desire to make a piece perfect with the need to actually complete it? Have you ever had to struggle with that?
Honestly, I think there is never a perfect illustration, because art itself is very subjective in the end. There's no, it's not like a mathematical equation where there's like, hey, you get the answer and it's done. It's kind of like, hey, I can work on this illustration for 50 years and I still won't consider it done. So it comes to a point where, for me, I always have so many random ideas popping in my head. Even when I'm working on an illustration, I'll be like, hey, I got an idea for another illustration. And then if you look at it over the course of my lifetime, I think about it and be like, hey, I have so many ideas that I want to, release and create, but realistically, I won't be able to during my lifetime. So at a certain point, I think you have to be like, hey, I want this to be perfect, but if I keep going at this, then I'll never be able to work on, the other ideas that I want to have. So as I said, done is better than perfect. So get it out there and start working on the other ideas that I wanted to work on. And of course, you're the creator. So even if you release something, it doesn't have to be considered completely done. Like, you can come back later and redraw, and fix things later down the road, because at the end of the day, it's your creation. So yeah, that's how I kind of try to balance trying to be perfect versus, finishing something and creating something else.
Did you discover anything new about yourself through this redraw?
Honestly, I don't say this often because I don't feel it that often, but I was quite happy with how much I improved over how many years is it? 13 years since I drew, because I feel like I was able to create an illustration where if I of 13 years ago saw this, would be like, wow, that's cool. That was the idea I had. But yeah, and there's also certain techniques that I tried while working on the piece. Because I usually do that where if I'm working on original illustration, I try different techniques or different processes to see if it, if it sticks, if it works. And, it's something that I might end up using in later works. Yeah.
What do you find enjoyable about remaking past works?
I think I mentioned it before, but it's basically the ideas that I had before that I didn't have the confidence to finally create fully. Being able to finally create it and be like, hey, I did it. I've done it. I've improved since then. And it really makes me also more hopeful for how much further I will go from here on. That, like me of 13 years later, how much more would I have improved if I keep at it? So it gives me like a very positive energy, I guess, discovering that, even after all these years, because I didn't quit drawing, that I'm able to create what I only dreamed of creating back in the day.
Lastly, a contest themed around redrawing your past piece is currently being held on Pixiv from June 16th to July 31st.
Please use what we talked about in this session as an inspiration, and be sure to submit your work to the contest.
That's all for today's video. I hope this video will be helpful to all of you. Thank you!